Right. 3, 2, 1. Hello, friends. Welcome to the After Hours Lounge. Welcome back if you are a regular listener, which I hope most of you are. My name is Sandy. I am your host. I'm really pleased about this one. I've been following this guy for quite a while. Obviously, those listening will know I'm very into my water sports, the windsurfing. Surfing, all that sort of stuff. So I've been following this guy for a while, and oddly, it only dawned on me a few weeks ago. I was like, fuck, this guy would actually be really cool to get on the podcast. So proud to introduce none other than, I think of no other word to call you than the Viking. But yeah, Red Bull athlete, multiple paddleboarding world champion, and just adventure junkie is the best word, I think. Casper Steinfath, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you, Sandy. Thanks for having me.
No, it's a pleasure, mate. As we said just before I hit record, we were like, I sort of reeled it off, and we were like, oh, actually, there's quite a lot to talk about here, isn't there? Because it's a funny one for you, I guess. Like, or any time you talk about, surfers or professional athletes that are in water sports, you always kind of go, oh, they're Hawaiian then, or Australian, or something like this. It's, I guess for you, you're Danish, you're from Denmark, but oddly enough, once you get into the water sports or industry kind of like that, you figure out that these kind of countries actually have a lot of that going on, don't they?
Absolutely. I mean, you don't have to live in Hawaii with palm trees to actually go out on the water and have fun. Evidently, you're seeing, at least for myself, growing up in Denmark, coming from the cold waters of Scandinavia, as I call it, I grew up here and that was my playground. And yeah, I didn't think that I needed to be in Hawaii to have fun on the water. So it's interesting, like how, I think in general, the perspective on being outside and playing, even on the northern latitudes, it's not that big of a problem after all.
Yeah, I wonder, I mean, we'll get into it later and stuff, but I do wonder whether that's, gear getting better or just more people taking an interest in kind of all these different sports, as things have become more readily available. But kind of take us back to the beginning, Casper. I mean, there may be some listening who aren't sort of sure who you are. I mean, give us a little sort of thing of who you are and what you do.
Ah, man, this is always the hard part.
Yeah, no, it's probably good. But, take as long as you like.
I guess the way to sum it up is, my name's Casper and I'm 27 years old, and I'm born and raised in Denmark, where I grew up as a kid on the west coast of Jutland, which is the westernmost part of the country, by the North Sea. And I grew up in this small old fishing village. I'm not like third or fourth generation. My dad is from California and my mother is from Denmark. So like living on the west coast of Denmark was actually kind of a compromise between California and East Coast Denmark. So it was, my dad is a surfer, and obviously the ocean and the waves meant a lot to him and my mother as well. They moved there and raised my brother Peter and I, and that was back in the rough days, when surfing and playing in the water was not necessarily accepted in the old fishing culture. So I mean, basically, what do? I'm a professional water sports athlete. I'm a 6-time stand-up paddle race world champion, and I am completely obsessed with adventures on the water in all forms and on all kinds of different crafts. So I guess you can call me a ocean addict,
a waterman.
So yeah, that's a more formal way of saying it.
I always find, I mean, it'd be interesting to get it from you, who you're actually a waterman. But me and my friends have always found that that term a bit cringy. People are like, yeah, I'm a waterman. Do you know what I mean? And you're like, it's a bit Laird Hamilton, isn't it?
It's been abused. But
yeah, definitely.
No. The term waterman is great. I really aspire to it, and like find huge inspiration in being able to see oneself on the water in all types of conditions and all types of watercrafts. But when people start saying, "Hey, I'm a waterman," it loses part of its appeal.
Yeah, exactly. It's always a difficult one. But yeah, I mean that's something I guess for you. I mean, we'll kind of start at the beginning, I guess. But you you literally do embody that. You know, if you look at your Instagram and stuff, every post you're on something different, whether you're just race, you know, paddleboarding like long distances, or you're surf foiling, or you're just, you know, traditional surfing, or you're sup foiling, sup surfing, like you're always, you know, kiting as well. You know, you're always kind of doing something different. And I mean, there's only a couple of, you know, real proper kind of athletes that really, or, you know, in terms of extreme sports, water sports, that actually do that. You know, like I guess Kyle Lenny's the kind of main one, isn't he?
Yeah.
Did you find that? I mean, I guess paddleboarding was the first one for you that kind of got you into it. As you say, you're, you know, 6 times world champion, or
Yeah.
was it just sort of traditional surfing and then paddleboarding came along?
Well, it was actually just traditional surfing. Because my dad being, you know, a beach bum from California, you know, it was essentially like just playing in the water at first, like, you know, body surfing and boogie boarding. And then as I was a kid, I started surfing as well. And that was kind of the gateway for me, just, you know, playing in the waves. And I was actually, I mean, I was actually, what do you call it? Water phobic when I was a kid. Like
Yeah.
I was terrified of water, until I was around like 8 years old. Like, you know how your parents kind of drag you into stuff when you're a kid and like, hey, you got to come to the beach today. That was kind of, you know, I did it because my parents did it, but I wasn't really stoked on it. But when some of my friends started surfing when I was around 10 years old, that's when everything just, like, you know, accelerated. And you know how young kids can kind of push each other, and I
Yeah.
got really into I got into competitive shortboarding for a while, and that was kind of you know, what got me in. Like, it just took me like full in, like I was in over my head before I could look around. And then came stand up paddling when I was a teenager.
Yeah, it's like that's really weird actually, because I was exactly the same. I was super scared of water. Like I remember, I don't remember really being pushed into it either. My dad's a
Mm.
really keen diver, but he never tried to get us into it or anything. But I was really anti water, and then I kind of suddenly went from that to competing in swimming when I was a kid, when I was like 11, 12, and then obviously now I've, you know, windsurf for years. So it's
Yeah.
quite interesting why you seem to go one way and then completely the other. But as you said, like you, as soon as you get that pressure from your mates, you get a group of boys or, you know, friends together, and you're like, well, I did this and I did this, you know, that pushes it a
Yeah,
lot.
exactly. Especially the camaraderie was one thing, but also, you know, you also, like, you know, of course, that, you know, surfing in these latitudes of Northern Europe, as a kid, especially, you know, a skinny kid doesn't stay warm very easy. So
Yeah.
it was also, you know, it's not necessarily pleasant to be on the beach or in the water if you don't feel you really are engaged in the activity. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was, you know, it just kind of slowly took off, and then, you know, all of a sudden it went really quick with stand up paddling. But that was kind of like a whole new dimension that opened up for me, at least.
Yeah, so let's get into that. I mean, those listening will know. I mean, I've talked about, you know, me windsurfing a lot, and obviously, you know, windsurfing, you know, kite surfing to a certain extent, obviously surfing as well, have been around for a very, very long time. But paddleboarding, whilst, you know, yeah, there's pictures of the Hawaiians doing it for thousands of years or whatever, and all this stuff. I don't know. You know, there's a big history, but paddleboarding as a sport is still kind of fairly new. And then, you know, everyone you talk to is, oh, it's the fastest growing sport in the world. And you know, last year in the UK after lockdown, apparently there was no paddleboards in the UK. You couldn't buy a paddleboard quick
Mm,
enough. I spoke to friends who own shops and stuff, and they're like, we're sold out.
yeah,
You know
it
it
was the same. It was the same in Denmark, and I think all
really.
over Europe. It just went haywire last
Yeah.
year.
So it's
It,
it.
it, it was it was exciting, like, to see the boom, you know, last year and in recent years. But what's interesting with stand-up paddling, like, yeah, it's not really that old of a sport. You know, it's existed as an activity for thousands of years. Like, it
Yeah.
doesn't take much imagination. Like, okay, if you're a kid and like, oh, there's a plank I can stand on. Hey, there's a piece of bamboo. And, you know, like, it's existed as an activity around the world for thousands of years. But then for some reason, like around the early 2000s, uh, you know, it took off some places in the US, and then slowly, you know, people started realizing, like, whoa, there's actually potential for, at least some of us in the early days, we saw it as a potential, like, wow, this might one day be like the bicycle of the ocean,
Yeah,
I guess.
that's a good way of putting it. So how did you?
But
Was there a concerted effort between, I mean, whether it was yourself or your family or anything like that? Like, did you notice this sport and were you like, this is my way to make a career and become a professional athlete and be sponsored by Red Bull
No, no,
and all this stuff? Like,
no,
how did that all happen?
no fucking way. It started as a joke, really.
Yeah.
It was a huge joke. You got to look at it like around 2006. I was like 13 years old.
Right.
I was super into like progressive surfing, like on a shortboard.
Yeah.
And I was introduced to stand-up paddling the first time on the island of Madeira down in Portugal,
Hmm.
where my family goes there every winter, and like there's some great waves, and it's just kind of that's where all my focus was.
Yeah.
And we're on this trip, and my uncle from California, he came over, and he was one of the early guys in California that was in on this whole stand-up paddling thing, and I remember he brought this red board home, like it was this really classic longboard shape, but it was so big that, and he was paddling around on it.
Yeah.
And on one of the days where the waves were, no waves, it was flat, and we were kind of bored. Bored surfers got to do something. My uncle just starts paddling around down on the beach. Like he puts on his shorts and his Hawaiian shirt, puts a cigar in his mouth,
Yeah.
lights it up, puts some sunglasses on, straw hat, and he's just paddling around looking like the biggest idiot I've ever seen. Like that looks so stupid in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then we play around and I end up trying it, and I was shocked, like, wow, this is actually a really cool motion of it's a challenge to stand on this board, first of all, but
Yeah.
like, wow, I can actually see things from up here, and I can paddle over along the coastline. So as much as I was laughing the first 5 minutes, uh, it hit me like a virus right there. I was just we brought the board home to Denmark, and like then I just got so engaged in paddling around when the waves were small or the waves were not there. It was like a whole new way to be on the water, and like it was just more like fucking around. I was
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
thinking like, hey, I'm going to be an elite race athlete.
Yeah.
There wasn't even there was no contests, no circuit back then. It was just
Yeah. Yeah.
it was the Wild West.
Yeah, that's funny. Like, I think that is the way, and unfortunately, I guess it is kind of still the way that a lot of athletes within sort of surfing or whatever probably look at paddleboarding of like, oh, it's just a joke and all this stuff. But I guess like every sport, you can just take it to its absolute extreme. But the beauty of paddleboarding, as you said, is like anyone, you can give it to your uncle, you can give it to your mum, you can give it to your grandparents, and they can go and even if they just kneel on it and they're like, oh, this is quite a nice thing to do. And I think that's why it's grown so much, because everybody can do it. But at what point, so obviously you're messing around and you're doing all this, like you're still quite young, but obviously you're starting to become a teenager, you're starting to think of what you're going to do with your life and stuff. I mean, how did paddleboarding tie into that? Like, at what point were they like, oh, this guy's really good, he's onto something, and he's paddling quite fast?
Yeah.
Obviously that's what you said, you got into the racing side of it. So how
Yeah.
did that all happen?
Well, at first I was just paddling around, for fun to, catch small waves and stay in shape, essentially, for when the waves came back. But I was also, I think it's important to look at, when I started stand-up paddling was like around, I was 14, 15 years old, which is a point in a kid's life where you start, for me at least, that was when I really started looking for my own identity.
Yeah.
Like, trying to find out, who am I? Even like, I'm not just this kid that does what people tell him to. Like, I'm starting to have my own desires and like dreams that I want to accomplish. And I think I started in high school, and I realized like, I'm actually this, I feel pretty good on this board. And then I saw, what really kicked it off was I saw this ad online for this SUP World Cup happening down in Germany, in Hamburg, I think this was 2009. And I was kind of just curious, because I'd just been paddling with a few of my friends at home and my dad, but it was essentially an echo chamber. Like, I don't know what like other people are doing around the world, so I was just hungry to go down to Hamburg and see what the fuss was all about.
Mm.
So so we go down there. I talked my dad into driving me down there, because it was Jever, which is this German beer company that was sponsoring the event.
Yeah,
And he
yeah.
figured like, oh, at least there'll be some beers around.
It's a good
So I get
idea.
down. It's always that's the trick with your dad.
Yeah.
But we get down there, and it's a big World Cup, and a bunch of the early pros at the time were down there, and I signed up for the amateur division of there's these racing disciplines, and signed up for the amateur division, and it's a long story, but long story short, essentially, I ended up accidentally borrowing Robbie Nash's board because there was this guy called Robbie Nash who I'm not really a windsurfer, and I had no freaking clue who Robbie is, but Robbie is like the greatest of all time
Yeah, yeah,
in the windsurfing world.
yeah.
And he was in on the SUP thing, and ended up like borrowing his board for the amateur final by accident. I was on the start line on another board, and then my dad came running down like, "Hey, try this board." And then I ended up actually doing pretty well, and found out that, wow, this endurance thing, that I really like it. I was naturally good at it, which accelerated my desire to keep
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
it. So that was kind of how it kicked off. And like Robbie, I met Robbie, and he remembered me, and we kind of have had a relation as my mentor since then.
Yeah.
And that was kind of like, I just realized like, wow, stand-up paddling is actually, there's a lot of cool people involved in it.
Yeah.
From all over the world, and that just gave me, like, it just sent me to the moon, full of motivation to do more of this.
Yeah.
So that was kind of 2009, and that's 12 years ago now.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it? You're always going to enjoy what you're good at. So I guess you get that sense of it. But as you said, like, people from all these other water sports industries, like cool people like, Robbie Nash and all these other guys are suddenly coming in, and they're like, yeah, we're making paddle boards, and we're getting into this, like, something to do when there's no wind and no waves, So they come in, and it does, I guess it kind of created this melting pot of kind of like, this is what's happening right now. So if you can, get in, and I mean, it must have worked, because you're still sponsored by Nash today, aren't you? So it's, that's a long relationship, I guess, that you've had.
It's the longest relationship I've had in my life. But it's true that yeah, like that was like the golden days in a sense when I look back at it, because there's just so much vibrating energy. Like, it was like everyone was excited about stand-up paddling. All the old windsurf manufacturers, Nash and Starboard and Fanatic, and all those brands were
Big
like,
ones,
they
yeah.
were the first big ones, and like, you don't see them as much anymore necessarily, because they're not the ones dominating the market.
Yeah.
But they were the ones that just like saw this wave of accessibility to water just about to take off, and that people from all different types of sports were getting involved with stand-up paddling. And there's a bunch of weird characters involved, and there's just, like, I look back at it now as, no one knew where it was going at the time.
Yeah.
The board designs were all over the place. There was no common consensus about what was the fastest type of board. So it was it was like we're a witness to a whole new sport being born, essentially.
Yeah, and then what was, you're in such a unique position, I think, because it's not, as we said before I hit record, like I've talked to a few pro athletes before and all this stuff, but you were a pro athlete at the start of a sport becoming a professional sport as well. So like you said, it was this tidal wave of kind of all these, people and things coming together. I mean, what was that like for you, being at the front of that tidal wave? Obviously, and now you since then you're obviously 6 times world champion and stuff, but what was that like, especially because obviously you were pretty young at the time as well? I mean, were you kind of like, I don't know if I'm ready for this, I don't know, or were you like, because you're young, you're like, oh, fuck it, this is pretty fun, isn't it? And then you might win a bit of prize money, or they send you some free boards or whatever, you're like, oh, this is cool,
Yeah, well, I was just stoked that there was free Red Bull in the athlete area.
Yeah, exactly.
But like, when I look back at it now, I viewed it differently. But I think when I was in the moment in those early years, I wasn't like expecting to become a world champion. I wasn't like expecting to make a career off it. It was more, and I think that was actually it was a general consensus among not just me, but all the people involved back then. It was just more of a, people had achieved other places outside of paddling, and it was just more like out of pure interest of like, wow, this is fun. And I definitely had the mindset in those early years of, I want to go race every single weekend all year long.
Yeah.
And Dad, you're gonna drive me. But like I was not, it was not. Yes, there was performance in it, but it was more of like, a party. Like every single weekend, we would all race really hard, but we would also all be drinking beers together and having dinner after the race, which is unheard of if you're actually talking to like serious athletes. And like, the sport is, even stand-up paddle racing is different today than it was 10 years ago. Like now people are serious. Back then it was, well, we'll paddle as fast as we can and then we'll have a beer at the end.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose well, that's, again, that was, one of the real reasons I wanted to get you on the podcast is to talk about that like mindset and determination that you seem to have of your, like, you seem to just see something, and we'll get on to Skagerrak later, because that's kind of maybe you'll be able to say, but looking on the outside, that's potentially one of the biggest things you've done. But that determination you have, you say, did you have that from the start, or did you get that after you started becoming successful? If say you when you're campaigning for the first world title, and then you go on, was that determination kind of always there, or did it grow as your ability grew, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I think it's safe to say that the determination was actually there even before stand-up paddling. Like I've always been very, I don't know how to describe it, but I've always been very goal oriented. I've always wanted to push myself. Like I was into athletics and track and field before, while surfing as well.
Yeah.
And like I genuinely just enjoy, the challenge of seeing if I can beat somebody, or I can beat my own record, or can I climb this mountain, so to say. And when stand-up paddling came in, like obviously I had a lot of fun meeting new people and going new places, but it didn't take long for me to refine that motivation of, hey, I actually want to see if, like, I'm not just running just to run. I'm in this to like see how well I can do. And I think for the first few years in stand-up paddling, I was, obviously balancing it between surfing and school and other things. But when I finished high school, and it's the same way I am when in the academic world in school, like I love learning. I really love improving my skills and advancing my knowledge. It's like I can't do a test, I can't do a paper in school just to get a B. Like I really want to
get a
go for the premiere at the A.
Yeah.
So when I finished school, I kind of had that mindset after high school that, hey, I want to give this a proper shot. And that determination definitely just went to the next level there. That was when I started chasing world titles, and I not just showing up to a race to have fun, but also there with a game plan and ready to go to war, so to say.
Yeah, that's where the Viking came from, then, I guess.
The Viking, the Viking. I don't know. The Viking kind of. Well, it was not myself that introduced that symbol.
Okay.
I was how do I say this? Like in the early days of stand-up paddling, like the people that were dominating the sport were Hawaiians.
Yeah, it's like Kailani and.
Yeah, well, the first generation was like Ikulu Kalama, Dave Kalama, and a bunch of like those real hardcore Hawaiians, Locke Eggers, and there were some really classic characters. And then my generation came about, like Connor Baxter, Kailani, Cody Kerbox, Zane Schweitzer, and the list goes on. There's so much Hawaiian talent. And it was fun because like we were all the same age. And like once we started doing the world tour events, I started meeting Kailani and all these other people. And we had the same interest and we clicked very well, and we went on these adventures together, which competitions and surfing was. And I guess I got the nickname the Viking because every time we were on the start line in Europe, especially, and it was freezing cold, like raining and windy, and all the Hawaiians just looked so miserable. Like I remember looking at Cody Kerbox, and I could just see his face read, I don't want to be here.
Yeah, yeah.
But and for me it was like, yeah, well, it's raining a bit and it's windy, but so that's like 5 out of 7 days a week. So,
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess that's why they nicknamed me
The Viking.
the Viking.
Yeah, well, I guess you are kind of you're the token European, I suppose, as well to start with. So they're like, well, just it's quite an obvious name, to be honest, isn't it?
Yeah,
I bet
yeah.
you like, I can tell by look on your face you hate it, or you hate it a little bit.
No,
But,
no, well, I no, actually, I've embraced it. I
yeah,
probably wouldn't have done it by
yourself.
myself.
Yeah,
But I genuinely identify with a lot of the values of the Vikings. Like I do feel I'm ferocious when I go into battle,
yeah,
but I also really admire their determination. Like if you want to sail across big oceans, you better have some guts to do that.
Hmm.
And their abilities, the Vikings' abilities as navigators, to make it all these incredible places. I really admire that, and that's
Yeah,
part of the Viking saga that we'll touch on later, I guess.
yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that rings pretty true, given everything you've done since. But as well, going back to that kind of mindset, and with the other athletes and things like that, you say you had this determination from the start, and did that end up turning into competitiveness against the other athletes, or was it always like, no, I'm doing this for myself and to better myself, rather than I just want to beat the other guy? I know that might be a silly question, and it
Yeah.
might be the one and the same thing, but do you think that changed eventually, and you were like, no, I just got to beat him, or were you still very much like, because obviously it's not a team sport, is it? You're
No,
very much, it's just all on you.
no. I think it's a hard one to answer for me because like I don't. I mean, this is also very personal for me because I don't necessarily see my like I'm not a traditional athlete. I
Mm.
guess that's safe to say. Like my mentality is not necessarily to always be perfect, or I don't operate under the parameters of that I can control everything.
Yeah.
I guess what really drove me was, I mean, partly there was a desire to obviously create an identity for myself, and I certainly enjoy being people recognizing me as a successful athlete,
Yeah.
or like having done incredible feats. But I think I was kind of on a mission as well, because since the sport in those early days was so dominated by Hawaiians and Australians essentially,
Yeah.
I want to show that Denmark can be up there as well. Like there was kind of a desire for me to prove that I can be up there in the big leagues with the big boys as well. So there was something I felt I had to prove. But then obviously I think what, yeah, how do you say, like there's external and there's internal motivations,
Yeah.
and like I was definitely motivated by the external of like sponsorships and being able to to receive credit for winning and being on the podium.
Yeah.
But I think my biggest inspiration and motivation was actually the process itself of
Yeah.
like when you go into a race well prepared, you know aiming to win, but just prepared to deal with this amount of chaos I have to go through. Like stand up paddle racing is not, it's at least in those days, it was not just the strongest guy that won. It was also who can paddle, like because we were racing so much in waves. um
Yeah.
who can navigate the waves. Like when 10 people hit the buoy at the same time, it's 100% navigating chaos. And like I really enjoyed the process of the races themselves.
Mm.
um and it was just, I think that's kind of what drove me for many years, was to prepare myself for those really awesome situations that arise inside the race.
Yeah.
It was not necessarily like, yeah, getting on the podium was great, but that was not, it was not always the main reason I
Yeah.
did it.
I guess that's one of the things that made you so successful, because rather than I mean, I've never been necessarily an athlete in terms of competing with other people and things, but and I'm not an inherently competitive person whatsoever, but I guess what you did is rather than focusing on what the other guys are doing, you've kind of, you've kind of gone, right. You're thinking strategically rather than competitively. So you're like, actually, I'm going to sit and do this. And especially as well, it's something we'll get on, again, we'll get onto, but you kind of talking about things that are out of your control, and just the nature of your sport. So many things are out of your control. You're at the mercy of, especially events like, I mean, well, just quickly, there's an event called Red Bull Heavy Water, isn't there, out in California, and it's basically sup racing in outrageous conditions, like huge, like waves and things that windsurfers wouldn't go out in, and they make you paddleboard racing. But something like that.
That's pretty accurate. It's essentially you mix big wave surfing with stand-up paddle racing, and you have Red Bull Heavy Water, which is
It's so
arguably
sick,
the craziest. It's the craziest race physically and mentally, because you're pushing yourself physically to the limit. Plus, at the same time, not everyone will admit it, but we're scared shitless out there of trying to navigate 5-6 meter waves, just trying to crush us. That's I can certainly say that I prefer those types of races that involve chaos. I mean, chaos is just the word I use, but essentially it means there's many factors outside of my control. It's outside of anyone's control, really. But I enjoy it because it really mixes up the playing field, and it's not necessarily just the strongest guy that wins, but the person that's able to, adapt. Like, you can go out. The saying about heavy water is that you can show up to the race with 10 tactics to get yourself through it and win. But once you get into the waves there, you might as well just take those 10 tactics, throw them out the window into the garbage, because you have to react to what's exactly in front of you. And it's just something that's like how the specific water is moving along the beach. You have to react. And I really enjoy that type of stuff.
Do you think then, in terms of obviously, your physical preparation is all, we don't necessarily need to get into that, too much. It's, but the mental preparation, a lot of it. And then do you think to a certain extent you kind of wing it in a certain way of like, you're like, obviously you're like, I know where the currents are doing, and I'm sure you can study charts and things like that. But other than that, are you like, let's just go and see what it kind of looks like on the day, really?
You have to adapt the mindset of, you're going to see what is in front of you on the day.
Flexible,
you have to be flexible, but that said, like, you have to be very serious about training, like, the physical aspect, the regimen. To be able to properly deal with what's in front of you, you have to be prepared. So it's not like you can't. I mean, look, in the early days of stand-up paddle racing, a bunch of the racers were just washed up surfers. So to a certain extent, you could wing it for a while.
Yeah.
But then, as people started training more and doing their homework, then the level went up all across. But still, even today, like, when, like, there's some guys in stand-up paddling that, maybe come with a little bit different mindset than me, that, try to control all the factors. I have huge respect for those type of athletes. I just think I'm becoming more and more aware that maybe I'm a different style. I prefer a different style of, I love those uncontrollable factors. That's what makes it exciting, in my opinion.
Well, exactly. That's where the kind of adrenaline junkie kind of side of you sort of comes in a little bit. So, I mean, talking about that, as I said, over the last week since we first spoke about doing this podcast, I kind of, did my homework, and you do, you're very active on YouTube with your content and all that stuff. And I mean, we'll talk about this at the end of what people should be watching. You can recommend it and stuff. But you obviously, after your world championships, in one of the interviews, you kind of said you were like, I wanted another challenge of doing something different. And that led to what you did called Skagerrak, which is that the name of that's not the name of the body of water, is it? Or is that?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I thought. I wasn't sure. So can you go tell us what Skagerrak is, and what the plan was, and then we'll talk about that.
what the plan was.
Yeah,
Well, Skagerrak is, it sounds very Viking.
it
Just
does. Yeah,
saying it. It's the body of water between Denmark and Norway,
yeah,
and it's a legendary ocean, both from the old Viking sagas and even for the last 1,000 years at least, merchants have sailed across, and it's a wild ocean that where the weather is very unpredictable, the currents are treacherous. It's just ticks all those boxes of
yeah.
don't fuck with it. Um, and
You decided to
it's
fuck with it.
that's kind of what happened. Yeah. No. So like I grew up, to get the story correct. Like I grew up in the with this ocean as it's my backyard essentially.
Right.
I grew up surfing in it, and I heard all these stories of fishermen and other merchants and stuff that went out beyond the horizon, and I didn't really think much about it until stand-up paddling came into my life,
Mm.
where I realized like, oh, here's something it's like a means of transportation as well. And that's at the same time I started really enjoying challenging myself. So, the romantic framing of the story is like I wanted to try conquering this ocean
Yeah.
in my backyard. Kind of like it'd be the same as say a kid grew up next to a huge mountain. You look at it every day, and at some point the thought is going to cross your mind: can I make it to the top? And what does it look like on the top? Do I possess the skill set it requires? So no one had attempted to stand up paddle it, and that's what I tried to do the 1st of February 2017. Um,
Cold.
it was a little bit cold. It was very dark.
Yeah.
And long story short, I kind of jumped into this crossing with as a project I did with Red Bull. Obviously, it required some safety and logistics. And anyway, I jumped into it, thought like, yeah, it can't be that hard. I've won 3 world titles at this point, and I enjoy challenging myself against Mother Nature. And basically, I set off from Denmark to cross to Norway, thinking like, yeah, this is gonna be epic. Like, make sure to put the champagne in the cooler, and we'll celebrate when we get to the other side.
Mm.
16 and the ocean of Skagerrak is approximately 145 kilometers wide, just for reference. Essentially 16 hours later, I was like crept down in the bottom of the safety boat in hypothermia, fully smashed, physically and mentally broken.
Yeah.
I was 12 kilometers from my destination in Norway,
Oh.
and Mother Nature, like you said, Mother Nature essentially just gave me this huge slap in the face, saying that you're not going to pass today.
Yeah.
And basically, what happened was I ran into some conditions that were just bigger than me. I was probably a bit too cocky, and yeah, I could literally when I could no longer stand on my board because the wind was blowing me the other way. Uh, I could see the lighthouse at my destination in Norway. But
Yeah.
no matter how much I fought, no matter how hard I tried, I was not going to make progress against this,
The
you
wind.
know, the wind, and essentially just this element that was so much more powerful than me.
Yeah. And what was
Uh,
what was what was that? As I said, and I watched. There's a whole documentary on YouTube about this. By the way, anyone who's listening, I think it's just called Skagerrak.
yeah,
On Red Bull, and it's epic. It's like 50 minutes long, but it's well worth a watch. But yeah, like the video of you like sitting on the steps on the boat when they're in the pitch black, and you literally you look like a broken man. Do you know what I mean? Like
yeah.
and I've
I
seen
what?
people, yeah. It must be. Do you kind of said, and this is from an interview I found as well. You admitted it, and you just said it there. Like you were like, yeah, I was being cocky and stuff. I mean, did you do any specific training leading up to this, or were you like, no, I'm already in a kind of peak physical form. I'm X amount of times world champion.
Mm,
I'm good to
mm.
go. Were you like, I can just do this?
I mean, and on the first attempt, I was definitely relying. I was probably sheltering myself inside the identity in my head that, hey, I'm 23 years old, I'm strong. And it's kind of like, I think it's something that many, especially males, feel at that point in their life, that they're invincible.
Yeah.
and like it was off season for me. I was actually not training that much. I was in good shape, but I was not in, physically I was okay, but it was more mentally I was not in the right state to do
Right.
that. It's kind of like, and if you could, I draw a lot of parallels to the mountains, and if you try to climb a certain route or a mountain without the proper equipment or the proper training or the right equipment, um, you know, you're you're not going to do it. You're
Yeah.
probably going to die, and that's yeah. When I look back at it now, it's really with a kind of like not very. I'm not very, in one sense, I'm not very proud, but that's how I was back then. That was what the mindset I entered it with. And in one sense, I was very devastated about failing, because essentially that's what I did. I tried and I failed. But when I look at it now, I'm also happy that I tried it,
Mm.
because I learned something from it. And
Yeah.
even though like it's not glorious or anything, to
Mm.
like, I remember I was on the board and my brother was on a jet ski next to me, just yelling at me, like, dude, we got to stop now, it's out of control. And I remember like trying to get back on the mothership, um, which is like, a small coaster.
Yeah.
I felt like I was in this what do you call it, in the scenes of like Deadliest Catch, the crab fishing program
Yeah. Yeah.
in
Yeah.
Alaska. Like, whoa, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
So it was a very humbling moment, I guess. It's a slap in my face, but ultimately it led to something more meaningful in the long term. And yeah, for that I'm proud.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you said at the start there of like men, especially. We do get to that certain age. And yeah, you're probably right. That mid around sort of mid-20s, and you're starting to really figure out who you are, and you're in kind
Mm,
of peak fitness at that time, and you're like, yeah, I can take on anything. I can do whatever I want, and you don't want to potentially admit to yourself as well that like, oh, I'm getting a bit older after this, and
mm,
things like that. So it must be difficult. And then I think you're completely right. For me, like you kind of have to. I think life is about peaks and troughs, and to expect it to just go on like that or to just keep going up is a really foolish thing to do. I think you've
yeah.
got to you've got to accept that things are going to go down. So it's oddly really really symbolic that it kind of happened to you in this kind of way.
It was super symbolic, and it was definitely my life was just in a maybe even exponential
Yeah,
progression upwards, like title after title, like, yeah, life is good, new sponsor, boom boom boom. And then like just such a contrast, of something just that didn't go according to how you envisioned it, which I think actually came at a very good time for me,
yeah,
to but it's interesting, like, because if you dig into like anthropology and like take a more psychological view on things, it's interesting that that maybe what made me try to do it, the cockiness that I entered the project with, the naive, what do you call it, I was naive in a sense,
mm,
about maybe what the actual challenge was, that that adventure lust and like willingness to take these risks is also part of what has led us as humans to develop as a species and live
yeah,
the lives we live. Like, I just look at the Vikings, like, who the hell would think getting into this boat and sailing west, across this huge ocean, not knowing what's on the other side, how can that seem like a rationally good
yeah,
idea?
yeah.
And it's because I did face a lot of criticism for attempting,
Did you?
in Denmark at least, like, it made the tabloid news, like, surfer tries to paddle to Norway, fails. Then the people have opinions about like, why do you do that? And it's so stupid, and like, do something meaningful with your life. But
Uh,
that had meaning for me.
mm,
And there, at some sense, like, I don't want to tell people not to try stuff, but also, we do need people that have that spark to take a risk sometimes. But and essentially that's those the ones, it was like back in the, I don't know, like, go back thousands of years, like, to tribal cultures, like, if someone tries to cross the river, you might find something exciting on the other side of the river that could help the whole tribe.
Yeah.
You might also get eaten by a bear and
Yeah.
die. So essentially, like, you need a balance of, people that you need the wisdom, and you need, this is just my mind rolling
No,
right now.
absolutely. No, I think I think it's all it's all really cool, and I think it's difficult as well because often the people with the most wisdom are the people that have, in their later years or whatever, the village elder or whatever, the person
exactly.
with the most wisdom. To me, they're often the one that crossed the river. They're the ones that went and did all this mad shit because they're like, because they've got the experiences. The person that sits in the hut knitting and doing stuff, they're never going to have much wisdom because they can't speak to all these different experiences, And I'm not saying it's difficult, and there's definitely a gray area in between as well. We don't have to all be Elon Musk trying to get to Mars or you trying to paddle 140 kilometers and stuff. But there's definitely a happy medium. But I think you're completely right. I think we all have that. There is that little bit in us, and in some of us it's much larger than in others. But
it's not for everyone. Like, you got to look at it. It's not either or, and it's not right or wrong.
Exactly.
We are comprised of a bunch of different personalities all around us. And some people, it's sometimes it's good to have, say, for example, the mother that wants to ensure that her kids live to be adults. So, like, it's without one or the other, you have problems. But it's something I'm learning as I keep questioning what I do. It's exciting to understand human dynamics.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's so interesting for you as well because you're just at the complete extreme end of like of being an athlete, of doing these challenges, or things like Red Bull Heavy Water and things like going into these environments that just humans shouldn't be in, basically. But what was that like? Obviously we've talked about the kind of intrinsic side of you, or the internal side of you sort of that first attempt of Skagerrak and things. Like external, I mean, you can talk about this as much or as little as possible. I mean, on top of you not managing to do it and, obviously feeling shit, what was the fallout like from that? I mean, did you feel a bit awkward and kind of stupid? And were you straight away like, I'm going to do this again? This is going to happen again? Or were you like, I need to, stop and take a bit of time away and things?
I think, obviously internally I was a mess right afterwards, but it didn't cross my mind at first that, like, I need revenge, I need redemption. I was kind of just like, I was probably a little bit disappointed towards, I was disappointed. I felt that I disappointed the people around me, my brother and Red Bull that financed the project, and all the people that were making a documentary film about it. And I mean, that was probably the funniest part. Was like 10 minutes after I got onto the rescue boat, the cinematographer Peter Alstead that directed Skagerrak, he said, like, man, this is the best thing ever. And I'm just looking at it, and I'm just looking at like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, I'm laying here, I can't feel my fingers, and like I just failed reaching say a dream of mine. But he saw it for kind of like the, as a storytelling, like he's looking at the challenge of the hero of, like, trying to reach his goal and has to fight the dragon, and which Skagerrak was essentially my dragon. So I didn't get it at first, but after a couple of weeks of reflecting, I realized that from my mistakes that led to the failure, I could actually learn a lot. So I bought this whiteboard, this huge whiteboard, and put it on the wall. And you see that in the film where I list all the things that went wrong and all the things that went well.
I remember.
There's like one thing that went well and like 10 million things that didn't. But then I felt the desire to learn. That was what, learn from my mistakes and give it another shot. Cause I'll admit, I was hooked on trying to redeem myself in some way.
Yeah. I think that, it's so, and that was something I was really interested in as well, kind of, and it maybe sounds a bit stupid for me to be interested in that side, but interested in like what the filmmaker thought. And, obviously, we've talked a lot about how you were feeling and stuff, but at the same time, I guess and maybe this is, I don't want to be a dick to you and, like push you, kick you while you're down and stuff. But, like, what did Red Bull think of, like, oh my God, we've paid for this boat to look after this guy to go across. And then, he's not managed it. But at the same time, the story, you're right, the story now and that documentary and everything is like a million times better. If you just
Yeah,
gone
yeah,
on, if you were like, oh, 3 times world champion, I got this, it's all good, and you jumped on your board
yeah.
and you paddled straight across, it would be like, oh wow, that's pretty cool. Look what he did. But it wouldn't have had anywhere near the traction, I think. And it
No,
would have basically been, there would have been no dragon in your story.
yeah.
Or you'd have just
It,
you'd have just killed it straight away. Do you know what
I
I mean?
guess I guess I agree with you. Yeah, I guess like I didn't see that myself because I was so immersed in it. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's from when people looked at it from the outside. It definitely made the story better. But ultimately, it was just my desire it's kind of like trying to solve a puzzle and you can't solve it, and then like you really want to solve it, and then that's when I immersed myself in it for the second attempt. And yeah, that was, I mean, the way it went on the second attempt was completely different. I stayed. Normally, I go to Hawaii in the winter, and this time I stayed home for 3 months training specifically for this project. And I woke up at like 3 a.m. Every day and like went paddling in the dark
Yeah, yeah,
to
yeah.
get used to it. And yeah, so it was a very yeah, the second attempt was such a contrast to the first one. And I still look back at that period of time as like one of my what I call like one of my favorite favorite points in my life. The immersion of really having something that motivates you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What remind me, I can't, what was the time difference? How long was it between the first attempt and the second attempt?
It was actually only 1 year that was
Right,
the
that's what I
difference.
thought. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So it was, I had time to reflect, and I had time to also, ask people for help. I asked, for help with navigating, and to understand how the currents worked out there. And I built a training program with my coach for, because there's a difference between sprinting uh, like 3 kilometers or paddling 145 kilometers.
Yeah, man.
So there's just such a long list of things that was different. And then that it just, yeah, it made the whole thing magical,
Yeah.
so that it actually succeeded at the end. It was, fuck man, I get goosebumps just
Yeah, I bet.
thinking of it.
And then do you, obviously, as you said, you completely changed your kind of training in terms of, fitness regimen and conditioning yourself for that kind of thing. But do you think the mental training and the actual mindset behind it, do you think
Mm.
your change in mindset has helped with that second attempt? And then what you've gone on to do after that, do you think, yeah, do you think if you'd completed the first attempt, do you think you wouldn't be the same person that you are now, would you?
No, I wouldn't be the same. I'm actually in some way very happy that I failed the first attempt, because I don't, it's part of learning, but I don't enjoy that perspective that I had before.
Yeah,
Like I look at it's like when we look back at what we ourselves did years ago, we'll always like think, why did we do that?
yeah,
But I admit it was part of me thinking like that at the time, but it definitely gave me just some humility,
mm,
like to not think that I'm the master of the ocean when I go out, even just for a normal session. Like I have that, it's kind of like a monkey on my shoulder. I'm always questioning myself, like, is this the right thing I'm doing? And I think that's something that I'm happy I got to learn from this whole ordeal. And but also the whole process. Like one thing was what I learned from it, but the process itself, about I set myself a goal that I wanted to reach, and like it was my ego essentially that fueled the whole project.
yeah,
Something that I wanted to do, and I had a hard time with that part actually, because um, you know I obviously tried to make the project about charity, for example. I tried to make the money the to raise money through the project at first. And essentially I was battling a lot of stuff about why am I doing this? And I
Mm.
reached at the conclusion in the end that look, it's my own ego, it's my own desire to see if
Can do
I
it.
can succeed in this, and that I have the skills needed. And it was very hard for me then, if that was the way I was looking at it, I felt it was impossible to go out and ask people for help
Yeah.
to reach it. Like I felt it was easier if I tied it up in some project to raise money for for very good causes as well. That
Yeah.
but what really, probably the main thing I took away from the project was seeing the people that I did ask for help, how much they actually enjoyed being part of the journey, and like they found meaning in it as well. And that's maybe back to the conversation we had about crossing the river before. uh, you know we all as humans, I think, want to feel that we're part of some adventure, and that we're, and I think it was me that was paddling, but essentially it was a group effort,
Yeah.
by all of us that made it happen. So that was the first part of the Viking saga, um, for me. And like I definitely sense that I'm not done with those types
Yeah.
of projects.
Do you think that? I mean, judging by the the passion that you're talking about it now, I mean, and maybe this is a really like arbitrary, stupid question, but do you think Skagerrak and stuff, does that mean more to you than the kind of world title, that kind of thing, or are they're kind of two sides of the same coin? Very, yeah, can't really compare them.
I don't know. You can compare them, but it's not you can't justify
Yeah.
that one is over the other. They're completely different.
Yeah.
But like they both require, to win a world title or to cross a hard ocean requires a lot of commitment
Mm.
and desire to do it, first of all. Where I think what I enjoyed about the ocean crossing was that it was like solving an equation that there was not a formula for.
You were
Like,
making it up as you go along, kind of thing.
yeah, because like when you're chasing a world title, like even though it was a new sport, like world title in stand-up paddling, there was kind of, like there's all this research about how to optimally train your anaerobic and aerobic systems, and like how to train essentially. Whereas to cross an ocean on a stand-up paddleboard, like it had been, people have done it before me other places in the world, but there's so many unknown factors, and that was really what I enjoyed trying to learn. And that was, I think I see it as part of challenging myself. And yeah, I probably would, if you ask me point blank, I probably will answer that crossing Skagerrak was bigger than any world title.
Yeah.
But that's only because I was so immersed in it, where
Yeah.
it required more of me than say a world title. But then again, like winning a world title in front of your family and stuff is priceless as well. So
Yeah.
it's impossible to answer that question.
Yeah. No. Well, I mean, you just answered it really, really well. So yeah. As I said, it might have been a silly question, but it's just something
Mm,
interesting to talk to you about. As I said, you're like, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to start this podcast, is just to have conversations with people like yourself, or
mm,
just interesting people who experience life, or who experience a life that not many other people do experience. And that's not me going, oh, you're a pro athlete, and
mm.
bowing down to you and all this stuff, but it is really interesting. Not many people get to stand there and go, I'm a world champion. Not many people
Yeah,
get to do these certain things you do. So it's so interesting for me to kind of get an insight into what it is. And that's the whole idea as well. As I said, the podcast about mental health and all this, and hopefully someone can take away something going, oh,
yeah,
maybe taking a bit more determination, or thinking, actually, even if I did do this thing and I failed, actually, if I put a bit of time in and try it again, and
yeah. I think I mean that's one thing that's kind of come up after the attempts is the topic of failure. And I really, one of the things I've really enjoyed post Skagerrak is doing some speaking events, like for schools and kids and young people,
yeah,
that I've been invited out to tell about the journey and how the project happened. But I really I don't really enjoy. I don't want to preach that this is the right thing to do, or that everyone should do this. But the concept of failure is probably the most interesting thing to dig into. And like, especially for kids, like it's awesome to go out to the schools and talk about what is their relation to failing. And we can all as humans relate to it, like whether we're a student that we're afraid of failing our exams so we can't get into the studies we want later, and failing a business presentation, or failing, I don't know, anything.
Yeah.
I mean, like,
It's relative. It's relative, isn't it? It
it's
relates.
relative.
Yeah.
Whether it's an ocean or an exam,
Yeah.
or a relationship, essentially it happens. And
Yeah.
like, it doesn't feel great, but in the moment it's certainly shit.
Yeah.
But there's something there's something I feel that we tend to forget a lot of times when we focus so much on that we want to succeed. We sometimes forget that failing is actually a very basic and essential part of succeeding.
Yeah.
You got it. Like, from being pushed down, you learn how to stand back up. And hopefully the I guess the way to sum it up for me when I talk to like high school students is, when we fail, we have a choice either to take the failure, pack it into a box, lock it, and throw away the key. That's one way to deal with a failure. But one of the more interesting ways, I think, is to actually dig into it. And that's the stuff. It's one of the hardest things to do, but that's where at least I feel I found continuous meaning.
Yeah. I think you're right. Like, it is the most important that you can't succeed without failing. Like,
They go,
one doesn't come without the other.
no, they go hand in hand.
Exactly. And like you said, we're all born to fail. I failed my driving test 2 or 3 times before I passed it. It's the way it is. But there's all that stuff, and we're all meant to do it. And I think it's people knowing that it's all right to do it as well.
Yeah.
People put a lot of focus on, you've got to succeed, and it's all about succeeding and doing this stuff. And to a certain extent, yeah, it is ultimately, you want to do well. But if you think you're just going to go through life like, yeah, this worked, and then this worked, and then this worked. I mean, I guess, like you said, that's probably what was happening up until in your life, up until that first attempt of like, this is fine, this is fine, this is fine. And that led to you, being served a shit sandwich, as we say.
It is.
It's a really difficult thing, and I think it's a really important message to kind of put out there as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to, dig into it, and one can come to all kinds of conclusions, but it's definitely it's not easy to fail, but hopefully we learn something from it at least.
Absolutely. So can you give us a little sneak peek? Obviously, I saw you've recently done you've foiled 100 kilometers in a day or something like that. But have you got any grand plans to? I mean, obviously, I guess COVID may have slowed things down. But have you got any grand plans to do anything else in the future?
Yes, absolutely. I've really, full disclosure, like, I've the last year with COVID, not that it was, it's not, as an athlete, it's not nice to see all essentially your livelihood with events and competitions like shut down. But it's been a very pleasant year for me, because I was kind of burnt out on competition after the 2019 world title that I won. I was just completely smashed. So I've really enjoyed resetting and charging batteries, and refinding some motivation.
Yeah.
And I think, like, I'm definitely excited to do more of my own projects, of my own, like, challenges against Mother Nature, where I still do enjoy competing, but I also enjoy stuff outside of the competition arena. I've kind of, and I guess it's not a secret anymore, but I am stepping in the footsteps of the Vikings. So I'm launching this saga where my goal is to step by step, not all at once, but try to follow down the path of where the Vikings went. And they went all kinds of places. They went across the North Sea. They went east. They went north. So like I'm not like specific on it yet, but I can kind of leave it there that I have a crossing planned this spring,
Cool.
where I'm going to attempt to foil as the first person ever from Denmark to Sweden,
Nice.
downwind. So that's what I'm training for right now.
Yeah.
Hopefully to get the right weather and ocean conditions to do it in April sometime.
Yeah.
And that's, just another, challenge and something that strikes me as interesting, to see if I can do this. And that's kind of, I'll be back competing later this year, hopefully. But
Yeah.
I tried to kind of look at with coronavirus now. I Instead of looking at the things that are outside of my control, I'd rather try to focus on the ones that still somewhat remain
In your control.
in my control. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a mindset, or that's something I talk about all the time on the podcast. Anyone listening will be bored of me talking about it, but like there
Oh, really?
currently especially, like there is no point in focusing on things you can't control, whether it's trying to book a trip or looking at the news. Even, like you're not going to find anything good there at the moment. Just don't do it. If you're
No.
already feeling anxious about it, things like that, just focusing on what you can control and trying to keep your circle small, if you know what I mean,
Mm.
and just focusing on what you can do immediately, is a really good way to do it. That's interesting what you said, though. I mean, so many people I've spoken to have said the same thing as you have said. Actually, the last year, even though you may have lost earnings or whatever, but they're like, it's actually been a really nice year for me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, like how we're all collectively faced with, our normal, most people's, normal habits have completely been turned, upside down, and where we normally like to vacation is no longer an option.
Yeah,
So we have to find alternatives, and I really enjoy like listening to people, and seeing people that have like all of a sudden come up with new ideas of like,
yeah,
new types of businesses have come up, and people have tried new stuff and gone out of their old ways. So I mean, it's a crisis, but from change comes new opportunities as well. And
yeah,
I don't, yeah. So it's a tough time, but it's also an exciting time to do other things. But
yeah.
I have a feeling we should be, or at least I hope we'll be back to. No, actually, I don't want to say that. I don't want to say we're going back to normal again, because
Yeah,
I'd rather look at it as we're going back to a new normal where
yeah.
we hopefully learn from something during this pandemic.
Yeah, I like to think that certain things will stay the way they have been for the last year, and then hopefully with just a lot more freedom, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Wow. I mean, Casper, thank you so much, mate. I think I'm sure there's plenty in there for everyone to listen. Couple of quick fire questions before we finish up. Obviously, I like to drink a couple of beers while I record this. Are you, as a Viking? I assume you said already you like a few beers. Is there a specific beer that you like to drink? I mean, give me a couple of recommendations for when I come over to Denmark. Obviously.
Oh, when you come over to Denmark, we're gonna have you covered. I live in a part of Denmark where our local brew house is for 3 years in a row. It's been the premier, what do you call it, award-winning beer
Oh,
house
really?
in Denmark. So we have a local. It's called the Thy Pilsner. It's a good pilsner.
Yeah.
And we have a ritual every time we do a downwind paddling across the local fjord. We have it's a porter also by Tisted Boykhus. It's heavy, man. It's heavy, but it's a ritual every time you paddle across. You got to drink or at least share a porter.
Nice. That's good. Yeah. I mean, I've heard very good things. As I said, my girlfriend's half Danish, so her mum's Danish, and all the family and stuff, and they all they live in Denmark and Norway. And I do really want to get over there as well, because there's some amazing conditions for me as a windsurfer. Like Vida
Mm.
Sand, Klipmoller, all this. I really want to go, and I really like to go and sail there one day as well.
You
Um,
should. It's a pretty, for me, I don't know. I look at it as the backyard, but it's a really fun. There's a lot of adventures to be had,
yeah.
whether you're windsurfing or kiting or
Anything.
paddling. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, because I grew up in the Highlands of Scotland, and my girlfriend, she's been up there to visit, my family and things like that, and she says up there it looks really similar to Denmark. She said it's a really, all the, the, I don't know, the trees and the beach, the way it all looks. I think if you draw a line across from Denmark, it goes straight to the Highlands of Scotland. So it
It's
makes
the
sense.
same latitude.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's quite interesting. So I'd quite like to get over there. I do feel a little bit like a Viking myself, Casper, if I'm honest.
Well, I guess
as you, but
well, we did the Vikings did go out your way, but
yeah,
it's I think all of us that live on these latitudes, Northern Europe, we're exposed to the same shitty, rough weather. So I think it's in all of our DNA.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, my dad was born in Orkney as well. He's my grand.
Oh, that's hardcore out there.
Yeah, my grandfather was the only, well, at the time he was the only solicitor on the island for many years. So my dad grew up on Orkney, so it's pretty cool. So yeah, I feel a bit like a Viking sometimes, but yeah. Next question: well, I mean, maybe we've just answered it, but where's your happy place? Obviously, COVID, we're kind of stuck where we are. But if you click your fingers right now, where are you?
I'm in my living room.
Yes.
This is my happy place.
That's awesome. That's what I like.
Yeah, out here and definitely on the water. The water is where I can leave everything behind. So either my couch or in the waves.
Yeah, nice. Like that. And then I don't know, maybe this doesn't apply to you because you spend a lot of time on the water. But are you a film? Are you a TV man? What's your lockdown viewing been? What have you been watching? What's good? Any recommendations, or do you not really watch much?
I binge watch so much, so many series. But my go-to during most of lockdown has actually been playing World of Warcraft on my computer.
Really?
Yeah. Before, if I had not gone professional paddler, I would have gone professional gamer.
Oh, really?
Potentially. I don't know, but yeah, gaming. And then I've watched a lot of. I mean, obviously, I'm a huge Formula One fan. So the Drive to Survive series that just came out, like I binge watched all 10 episodes in one day last Sunday. So yeah, I really enjoy sports documentaries, and I'm into Mad Men right now.
Oh, that's so. I watched that a couple of years ago.
Holy shit, man, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
About the description of the time and
it's crazy.
The Office mentality. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Mad Men. Mad Men's it's kind of one of those shows, isn't it? Everyone recommends it, don't they? They're like, yeah, it's one of those, like, it's in every top 10 list everywhere, isn't it? Like
it's got to be a classic.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's a classic. That's interesting. I didn't realize you're a gamer as well. Yeah, that's it's funny, isn't it? You kind of have these like assumptions about people, don't you? And especially if you're a surfer and all this stuff, they never assume.
Yeah. Well, I as a kid in Denmark, the winters are super long and dark. So we were inside, and yeah, it's fun. I definitely enjoy the the social part of gaming as well, and it's got something to it.
Well, it's escapism. It's perfect escapism, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where can we find you? Where can listeners find you on social media or anywhere, Casper?
Well, follow my adventures over on. I'm mostly active on Instagram over at CJ_Steinfath.
Yep.
Or on YouTube, Casper Steinfath. I'm posting more and more on YouTube, doing some vlogs and just basic fun on the water stuff. But yeah, just give me a follow over there and join the adventure. Never quite know what's going to happen, but that's part of it.
Yeah, that's part of the fun. Cool. All right, guys. Well, thank you very much for listening. You can find me on Instagram as well at the After Hours Lounge. And if you go to the link in my bio, if you want to, you can buy me a beer. As I say, all this talking is thirsty work. And it helps me support the podcast and keep it all going. But if not, even just you listening is perfect, you lovely people. So yeah, guys, thank you very much. Thank you, Casper. And we will see you for the next one.